Okay. Uh, all the sessions will be recorded, and those recordings will be posted up on YouTube, and I'll put a link up on the As You Learn site for the YouTube videos. There might be some other videos that'll be up on YouTube too. I'm kind of working on a few things that I think are better delivered just as a video as opposed to, some sort of session where everybody's sitting here. And so I'm working on a couple of those things. But in general, once we get going, and I had to make a slight change in the schedule. I'm still kind of waiting on some things to kind of fall into place at the university in terms of getting a few meetings and a couple of other groups that I'm involved with. All those schedules worked out. And so it has already begun to create a little bit of a havoc around things. So next week I had intended that we would not meet, and then we would meet the following week. I'm going to have to flip-flop those so that we will meet next week, but not the following week. So we'll meet on the 5th, but not on the 12th. Hopefully by the end of next week or so, I'll have pretty much all my stuff for the semester on a schedule form someplace, so that we can settle on a meeting pattern. I do not intend to meet every week. I just don't think that's terribly useful in a course like this. That it's better if we kind of have some asynchronous stuff that's happening in between the synchronous meetings. And this is a kind of a course that's got a discovery component to it. You just have to kind of do the work and grind through a few things, and as you move along, you'll become a bit more adept, a bit better ingrained into the sort of notion. This is the basic research course. I have taught this course over a number of years. This is I've taught it every year I've been at App, and beyond that point, a lot of years before that. This is my 41st year in higher ed, and I've been at App for 11 years. I was at community college as a VP for institutional effectiveness and director of institutional research for a couple of years. And then I was almost 30 years at James Madison University as mostly faculty, but 5 years I was department head, and a couple of years I was a interim associate dean. Supposed to be 6 months, ended up being 2 years. And a few other various roles at First Institution that had to do with institutional improvement sort of notions. And prior to that, I was 5 years a high school teacher and coach. So here we are 46 years later. And obviously I am, how do I say this? I'm chronologically advantaged in that I am, easily old enough to be most of you's grandfather, and we'll see how that works out. But 70 is not a bad age, so that's kind of where I'm at. I have no. I will let you know that I have no real instinct to think about when I might retire or anything like that, because it just doesn't seem. I don't know. It's not a reality that I kind of embrace. I think you keep going until you can't, and then you lay down. And so I'm not at that point yet. I've got perhaps a few more good years in me. We'll see how all that goes. This is an area that I have basically focused my career and my preparation around. I am my PhD is in research and evaluation, and at app. I serve as an instructor in research classes, stats classes. I'm a research methodologist. I teach some doctoral courses and serve as a chair and committee member on, I guess, in 11 years, about 35 different dissertations. And I have 3 of them I'm chairing right now that have to be done this year. One of them has to be done in a couple of months. So obviously he's a basket case right now, but we'll get him through. But he won't call me in the middle of class and then have a meltdown before I get back to him. But it's one of those deals where you kind of move people along and keep them moving. But I do take this class very seriously because I think it has an application in almost every field. And I do tailor the class to the individual fields. And since this is, more library science and media services and, areas like that, that's the direction we'll take with the class. And so instead of a sort of a research prospectus idea as an outcome, we will look at a school improvement project as an outcome. Because it's more likely that you'll be involved in sort of the action research and impact research that's so much a part of what schools are about today. I mean, we do a lot to try to keep improving schools, to try to keep doing better at the things we're doing, and that works also in sort of community organizations. And so it is a part and parcel of where we are. We're in a continuous improvement cycle, and data can play a big part of that. So that's why we talk about school improvement project. Just as a personal side note, I appreciate your kind wishes with what's going on in my family these days. It's looking positive. The prognosis is good, and we're about ready to get into the whole treatment aspect of it and kind of see how that plays out. When you have kids, at some point you may think that at 18 or 21 or 25 or whenever they get a real job, they're kind of, you don't worry about them as much. But my oldest son is a 33-year-old lawyer building a law practice, and we still, his mother and I are still his fallback position at this point. He's a bachelor, and so he needs a support system. Right now we're that, and I don't think it will get in the way of sort of course. We're kind of at a point now where his mother will be kind of taking the lead on this as I try to maintain some sort of order, some sort of semblance. But just as an aside, so you'll know, in case I get a bit distracted here or there or something along the way, I'll try not to let that happen. But all in all, it might happen. I don't know. All right. Okay. So I'm going to read your narratives. I haven't gotten to those yet. I've been kind of trying to get geared back up and read a few things here and there. So I haven't gotten to that particular piece of the puzzle yet. So once I get into that, I'll have a bit better sense of kind of who you are and where you are in your career and where you see that career going and where you see you going in that career. And I always find those terribly interesting. I don't really, react to them all that much, but it is always good to know in sort of this online environment that we exist in, just who you are and who I'm dealing with, and kind of what your expectations are, both personally and professionally. And so those are always interesting for me to read. So I will be getting to those, and I'll check those off as soon as I do. Any questions before we get into kind of a discussion of the course syllabus and the projects within the course and those sorts of things? Okay, well then this might not take too long. Yeah, obviously this this format is somewhat limiting. It is pretty much a conference meeting type format. Doesn't foster a whole lot of discussion. I'll try to create as much of that as I can, and I'll try to always recognize someone that's got something to say or a point to say or whatever. And so feel free to chime in or throw your hand up or whatever it is, and we'll kind of make sure that we get to that. But I guess the best thing to start with is to look at the syllabus and kind of see if there are any questions that come up around that. So let me see if I can get that shared up.
I have a question about it.
Go ahead.
I was looking at the research brainstorming assignment, and two different places there's two different dates. One is September 4th and one is September 2nd. Which one of those dates would you prefer?
Good question. Obviously, I may not have fine-tuned everything last week. And, as this is a course that we often offer, it's one that, 4th, definitely the 4th. 2nd's Labor Day.
Well, I was making sure it said both. So, all right. Thank you.
Trust me, I will not be reading anything on Labor Day.
All right, thank you.
Or anything to do with a course or a dissertation or anything like that. I'll read the Post and the Times, and then I'll watch a whole bunch of TV, something. Tennis, baseball, whatever, any sport. As I mentioned, my earliest career was a high school teacher and not my earliest, but early in my education career was a high school teacher and a coach. I coached basketball and football, and I played baseball and basketball and football and ran track and anything you could do to break up life on the farm. Grew up in a very rural part of the country. We kind of made Appalachia look like the rich suburbs sort of notion. We used to, it's euphemistically referred to as the sticks. And so anything you could do at school to get out of going back and, cutting firewood and milking the cows and killing a chicken for dinner or whatever, you tried to get out of that. So did a lot of sports. But anyhow, sometime or another, I'll regale you with various stories of my upbringing and the one-room schoolhouse and, the outdoor John and the whole thing, but you don't want to go there. And also talk about my Army days, but you don't want to go there either. Suffice it to say, the last 40-some years have been devoted to education. And but there was some things I'd prefer not to remember before that. And so we'll get into those. Yeah, but 4th is fine. Yeah. Obviously, as I updated these syllabi and the dates and things like that, I probably didn't catch everything as I went through. I'll try to go back through and make sure I've cleaned that up. But going forward, if you have a question about dates, it's probably because I've screwed it up. Or if you have a question about where do I post something, it's probably because I forgot to turn the link on. So I will automatically, offer a blanket apology for all those things that I forgot to do or meant to do or didn't do. But it's your responsibility to remind me of those so that I can go back and fix it. The one thing I have discovered after many years in the saddle, so to speak, is that your memory is not as great as you thought it was at one time, and but that's okay because you remember the important stuff. And I'm actually doing more technical work and technical writing and all those things that that goes into scholarship than I have ever done before, and have more things in print and more things coming out and things like that than I ever have before. And I don't know whether it's the compression as you get toward the end of your career, you figure, well, I got to get a lot of things done, or it's just that you don't, not remembering little bitty things kind of frees up your mind to deal with some bigger things. So it's up to you to remind me. It's up to me to apologize and fix it. Okay, so we'll go with that. Other questions before we kind of look through the syllabus real quick? Okay, well, let me see if I can share that thing up. That's not what I need. I'm sorry, I've got to go over here and get rid of a page before I can get to that page. Okay, now let's share it up. Okay, you should have the syllabus page up. Is it up? Can you see it? Okay. I keep asking that because it closed for some reason. Gave me an error statement on this end, so let me try that again. Okay, there it is. Okay. One of the things that happens, almost regularly in between semesters, and particularly over the summer, is that the university uses that time to update stuff and to switch over servers and, all kinds of things like that. And of course, just in the last month or so, they have updated As You Learn, and they have put Zoom on a new server and put a new infrastructure behind it. And, so we're still kind of hoping that everything works the way it's supposed to work. And that's not always the case when they do this. So if there are any little glitches or whatever, we're supposed to report those. And I will do that every time it shuts down or does something crazy. Just be aware that that could happen. Okay. Obviously, the synchronous dates are junk. Well, actually not. They may be pretty close, but the only two you need to pay attention to are obviously today and next week. The others, we will see where that goes. It's possible that those are the correct dates, but it's also possible that they're not. In fact, I think the 28th might be Thanksgiving.
It is.
And so I have to fix a lot of that a little bit. So we'll clean all that up. But the only two dates that are live right now are obviously we're here and next week. I do have an office in the Ed building at App. I am almost never there. I will be there tomorrow for a total of 4 hours to meet with 2 doc students. And outside of that, I make occasional appearance just to remind people that I'm not a myth, that I do actually still exist. All of my courses and almost all of the work that I do is online, so it's really not incumbent for me to be on campus most of the time. In fact, it would be a little bit difficult to do. If you need to reach me, you've got my cell number, you've got my email address. Email, start there. And if I tend to respond to those pretty quickly, I'm always checking email. I'm checking email when I'm awake. And I'm an old guy, so I don't sleep all that much. So, I'll check it pretty much constantly. And I'll try to respond as quickly as I can. It certainly will be within 12 hours or so at the very latest. If there's going to be an issue, I'm going to be out of town, or there's some conference or meeting or something like that I have to be out, I'll obviously always let you know that I won't be available during certain time frames. Now, if there is a need for us to talk individually, one-on-one, we'll do that virtually. We'll use the same Zoom platform, if that's okay. If you would prefer, I can do something as old-fashioned as a phone call, and I will be glad to do that if it's more convenient. You're traveling or whatever, that's always going to be an option. And so just be aware that the best thing to do is email me, and we'll work it out from there. There's really two purposes to a course like this. One is to enable people that are practitioners, that are actually teaching or working in organizations or higher ed organizations or whatever, to be able to read and interpret what we know about what may be going on. And we'll do that through asking you to do a lit review related to what it is that you want to do as an intervention. We don't do anything in the professional sphere without connecting it to what we already know or what we already have learned. And we don't take flyers. We always work at, what is it that we know? What is it that we can draw from? Where can we start? And so, it's part of the mission of this course is to kind of help with that idea of, how do you make some sense out of the literature that happens to be out there, what we know about things. And the other is that to employ some basic research methodology, particularly those types of methodologies that are often used in sort of action research or impact research, to understand the impact or the changes that might take place due to interventions or changes in activities or changes in curriculum or changes in structures or policies that we might implement in a school or other organizational setting. And so it has those two folds. One is to help you become a little bit better consumer of the research that's out there. And the second one is to help you develop some, just basic, rudimentary skills in terms of how to actually go about doing the type of impact or action research that can be useful for you in school or organizational settings. And then you'll find there's a lot of dialogue there in terms of what we hope the course is able to do. If you look at the course objectives, you'll see that there are some general objectives there, and if you want to put them within those two frames, the one dealing with understanding what's out there and the other one dealing with developing an awareness and some basic skill about doing impact or action research, they kind of shake out of those two things. This is a graduate course, obviously. The fact that I record the course means that I realize that there are instances in which individuals can't be here. Are there instances in which individuals may want to go back and look at what may have gone on during a course session? The vast majority of what happens in this course happens outside of the synchronous settings. And the vast majority is kind of incumbent on you, to do the things I ask you to do and take a look at the things I ask you to take a look at and take my feedback and use that feedback to move things forward. We'll use As You Learn as the basic structure backbone of the course. And so, anything related to assignments or postings or whatever, everything will go in as you learn. I ask that as much as possible you use a kind of a formalized, obviously we're not strictly APA quite with all the products. The final product, yeah, we'll ask that you do it as best as possible APA. But make this a usable sort of experience, and given my old eyes, make it readable for me. And so, please 12 font, something like that, so that it's easy to react to and easy to read. There will be essentially, well, let me stop for a moment and kind of make a statement. I'm a firm believer in what I like to call as mastery learning. I'm a firm believer in authentic outcomes. And so I don't believe in doing things that really don't have a connection to the authentic outcome. And so the basic elements of the course beyond the narrative is just so that I can get a sense of who you are. But the basic elements of the course, the basic assignments, all feed into the final product, which is that school improvement plan, which we'll look at here in a bit. And so as an element comes in, like this first one after the brainstorming piece about, some sort of intervention or some sort of quote unquote research question, I guess, but you can obviously phrase it in the language of an intervention. Here's something I'd like to do or something that we're going to do, and need to figure out, how do we know if that works or not, or how do we know if it's effective or not. And so once we get beyond this initial brainstorming piece, then that turns into a problem statement and a description of the area of improvement and why the improvement is needed, and what information we have about the organization that shows a need for the improvement, and a little bit of is there anything in the literature that helps us understand that. And once we get that piece done, you'll submit that, and I will obviously react to that and give you feedback on that. And then that piece ends up flowing into a bigger lit review, and that piece ends up flowing into a research design that talks about implementation. And the research design piece has 2 or 3 elements to it in terms of an action plan, in terms of data outcomes and data to support those outcomes, and a plan for collecting that data. And so all these elements, all these pieces kind of feed into this overall project. And there will be, by the time we finish, probably 4 or 5 iterations of this project, having different elements adding to it as we go along. And so it's kind of builds upon itself. And so there is not, there is not a quote unquote grade for each element. There is a checkoff that you have submitted it, you have responded to the feedback that I gave you, and then the next project, the next piece, the next iteration, once again, when it's submitted and I've read it, there's a checkoff that you've submitted it and you've responded to the previous feedback, and I'll give you additional feedback, and then we kind of move along. And so when we get to the end, this final product ends up being something that's meaningful and has, hopefully some application and some utility for you. But we kind of build and build and build into this authentic project at the end. And that's my notion of mastery. And so, your responsibility on the other side of that is to do those things I ask you to do. And then on time, because, timeline is a big deal. I'm teaching 3 graduate classes a semester and got these 3 dissertations I'm chairing. So, my schedule is crunched. And somewhere in there, I've got a couple of deadlines for an article and a book chapter. And so, it's kind of important that once we get deadlines in place, that you kind of meet those deadlines. Not kind of, that you meet those deadlines so that I can give you feedback and we can move on to the next iteration and keep moving forward. So your responsibility is do what I ask you to do, submit it on time, and respond to the feedback. And that's pretty much where I come from. Back into the syllabus. Any comments or questions about that before we kind of finish looking at the syllabus piece? Okay. We'll get y'all talking eventually, but I know, first session, hard to do. There are no texts to buy or outside resources to buy. Everything that I want you to use or take a look at or work with, I'll provide on As You Learn. Most of it is directly off of internet sources. A few things that I've drawn over the years that I've kind of archived that we'll also be using, but it's pretty much straightforward. And so you will be able to forego the pleasure of buying a new $150 textbook that will be holding up a leg on a table in a couple of years. And so we'll move forward with that. You can look at the evaluation and grading stuff. My mastery model kind of supersedes all that. And you'll notice this statement at the end of the grading piece, that in keeping with mastery learning philosophy, your grade can normally be no higher or lower than your grade on the final performance measure, the final research proposal, or in the case of this class, the school improvement plan. And so that kind of sums up the whole mastery notion. I have no problem with 13 or 14, hopefully 14. I think there's 14 people in there, but I have no problem with 14 people walking away from the course with an A. That's perfectly fine with me. I don't worry about the foolish arguments about grade inflation or whatever. I think the whole point of education is to learn things and acquire skills and acquire knowledge and be able to implement within your professional settings. And I do occasionally have a person that figures out some way not to get a good grade. It generally has to do with not submitting stuff or not responding to feedback or things like that. But that's only on occasion, and I assume that those people have some issues that go beyond me. So otherwise, I've even tried to help a few folks like that. I am a licensed counselor, so I can shift gears into my counseling mode if need be. I'm also a licensed mediator, so if we have a fight that breaks out, I'll be able to mediate that too. So, yeah. And then you have an outline at the end that basically lays out anything and everything that we could teach in a basic research course. We will not, I repeat, we will not cover all that material, but the material for this course will be drawn from various pieces of this outline and some other stuff. For example, we will, let me get rid of this share, we will delve into logic modeling. And I'm assuming that you and your programs are, I think that's one of the elements of your program that you get into, the notion of logic modeling. We will delve into that. We'll use that as a basis for building a theory of action. And I think you'll find that incredibly useful for you in your career. Once again, if you haven't done much of that or any of that at all, I think you'll find it really useful. You're probably familiar with it if you're in education. It's called backwards planning. That's the education take on it. But it's actually a concept called logic modeling that goes back a little bit earlier than when education began calling it backwards planning. And so we'll use some of those ideas as we get into the course. General questions about the syllabus, the grading, my mastery, philosophy, any of that stuff before we look at the project outline just a little bit?
As long as it can be converted to a Word document, are we okay using Google Docs?
Yeah. But I will, yeah, I'll convert it to a Word document, and I'll actually the way that I give feedback, and I do this for a couple of reasons. One is everybody has an individual sort of writing style, and I don't really encourage people, if I'm doing feedback, just to accept the changes that I suggest. Sometimes it may be the way you worded something, or an awkward way of approaching something, or stuff like that, or it may just be that you completely kind of missed the boat here with something, and so you need to think about this, that, or the other. The way in which I respond is I convert everything to a Word document. Even if it's a PDF, I convert it to a Word document and do the editing in Word with markup. And then to come back to you, I save it back out as a PDF. So you'll get a PDF file that'll have, your document with all of my comments and markups and all on it.
Perfect. Thank you.
And that way, I think it's just a little bit cleaner that way. I was working with a class 2 or 3 years ago, and well, more than that, several years ago, when Google Docs was just coming out, and people were just beginning to use Google Docs, and I was not using it in a class, but somebody had it and had been using it in another class, so they began to submit things to me in Google Docs, and I thought, oh, that's okay. So I went in and did the edits on them, and shared it back out until someone else in the class said, well, what they actually can do is they can just accept your changes and not have to do any of that work themselves. And I thought, that's not, I've done all this crap, I've put in my time and toil. So, part of education is there's a certain time and toil to it. And so, that person became very upset with me when I shifted to the model that I use now, where I shift everything back to a PDF. But yeah, what can I say? I discovered when you try to convert a PDF with markup in it to a Word doc, the markup goes away. And so, that was my big discovery that made me kind of shift to this pattern. Plus, it's just easier for me to have it as a record if I've got PDF files that are clean as we go along. Any other comments, questions, or we can take a quick look at the outline, and then I'll make the outline of the project, and I'll make just a few general comments about the research in general, and then we'll kind of call it a night and launch into it, all thrusters burning next week, and hopefully move right along. All right, well, let me go over here and make sure I've got the okay, there it is. Got it. Okay. And this is essentially instructions for a school improvement plan. It's a little bit different than I would use in a course entitled School Improvement Planning, because it's a little bit more generic, because we're kind of basing this around more generic research skills. And so we've kind of, it's a hybrid between what you would see as a very technical improvement plan and a research type prospectus, but it's got potentially all the same elements in it. And so you can tell that it's it has title page, table of contents, all those things that you would expect in an APA document. Those do not have to be there throughout. They do need to be there at least in the last couple of iterations of the project. And I at least ask that as we get into the project a little bit more, make sure you are using headers and page numbers, so that I can at least follow the flow of things and make sure that I've got I know what I'm looking at. The problem statement is really focused around two things. One is the context of what I call the deficit. If you're going to improve something in school, it has to be because there's something that needs to be improved. And it may be a deficit from what you would like it to be, or it might be a real deficit in that you have a school that's not performing, or a program or a department or whatever that's not performing as you would hope it would be able to perform, at least compared to other departments, other programs, other schools. And so within that context of the deficit, we're talking about, okay, what's the community look like? What is this particular setting? What are the students like? How big is the organization? How big is the school? I mean, what's the all those particulars in terms of what the school may look like, how much free lunch, or if it's a secondary school or whatever, how much, what are sort of the demographics? What's the ethnic breakout? So much of what we know about schools today is that there are big deficits between, ethnicities and different groups. And, those deficits are very often the focus of the improvements. And so we need to know what the school looks like so that we can, or the organization looks like, so that we can know kind of what we're dealing with. Is there local data, and is there comparative data? If you're talking about performance data, say for a school, there's very much local data, and there's also comparative data, for the division and for the state, and all those sorts of things. And so if there are comparatives or local data that you can call up, then that's what you want to add in, so that it's, it has some basis in data. And then there is the overall long-term goals. What is it that you hope the project to do? How would you describe the project in general? How would you describe the intervention? What are some specific outcomes that you would be concerned about? I mean, what do you want to see happen? Now, as we go forward, I'll be pushing you to think about shorter term outcomes as opposed to summative year-end outcomes. Because there's so much that goes into summative outcomes that may or may not be related to the intervention or the project that you're talking about. And so if you look at stuff at, end of the year, end of the semester, or whatever, that's useful data, but it's when you're doing projects or you're doing interventions or you're doing, impact research or action research, you're really just as interested in what's happening in shorter terms. And so you'll want to, I'll keep pushing you to think about short-term outcomes along with the more summative outcomes that are more long-term. And that'll vary a lot, obviously, depending on your idea of the project, the intervention. That'll change quite a bit. And then, what's the general impact on the school community? How will it impact the different stakeholders? How will, if you're able to pull this off and this intervention works and has an impact, how will it impact students? How will it impact teachers? How will it impact parents? How will it impact school administration? How will it impact the school board? What will be the impact if you're able to pull this off around the different stakeholders? Now, that's the first piece, and it really is sort of the statement of the problem. I mean, what is it? Once you get this description of what you're wanting to think about or thinking about working on, and you get that kind of detailed and broken down, then we begin to play out the rest of these elements in a draft. Now, once we kind of get all that pinned down, or at least theoretically pinned down, the second and probably almost simultaneous piece of this is begin to look into the literature to see what the research base might tell you. What is it that we know about this particular thing that you're working with? What do we know about its success? Now, as much as possible, avoid over-reliance on what I call proprietary research. Research that's generated by the organization that's actually, or the group that's actually doing this thing, if you're dealing with some sort of canned idea or whatever. See what some of the outside elements, some of the outside voices say. And that may require that you go a little bit broader in terms of looking at the outside research, but it's according to the proprietors that crank out various things, everything is perfect. And they'll find a way to, frame the research in that way. And they'll do a lot of anecdotal research. They'll refer you to this place and that place where they did this and it was wonderful, it was great. They'll never refer you to a place where they had problems. And so you'll want to make sure that you have some balance to the lit review. Lit reviews have three basic pieces in it. One is kind of the assumption of the lit review. What is it that you're actually looking to find out about? What limits do you have on that? Are you looking in a certain time frame? Are you looking in a certain size school or a certain size organization? What are the assumptions you're starting with? What's the appropriate literature? And we're going to keep this fairly short. We're going to look for 8 or 10 sources, something like that. So nothing overwhelming. And 8 or 10 sources, can sound like a lot, but it's not really that much. The dissertation that I'm working on right now, that'll be defended here in a couple of months. His bibliography is up to about 135 sources or something. And he's still got a few holes in it. So, there's a lot of stuff out there, typically, if you look enough. And out of that, we'll develop a little bit of a conceptual framework. And what a conceptual framework is, based on what's in the lit review, what do you expect the outcome of your school improvement impact research to be? What do you expect to happen? Now, if this were a research proposal, we'd have a different definition for conceptual framework. But since this is a school improvement proposal, we're talking about what might you think might happen as a result of this school improvement. What could you expect? And then the research design piece, the third element starts with theory of action. You know, what are the outcomes? What are the activities needed to generate those outcomes? What resources are needed to support those activities? That's the backward planning model. That's the logic modeling piece. And so there'll be a logic modeling assignment here to help you figure out what the theory of action is. What's the connection? Sources of data. Where will you find data? And data collection techniques. How will you access that data? Who will be in charge of collecting the data? Who will be in charge of collecting which elements? And then how will the data analysis be handled? And that's the plan. And so the final project, the authentic project at the end, will have all these elements in it. The first one is really leading up to this first section, this project description or intervention description. That'll go into beginning to be the framework for this first section here. As you get into the literature, you'll find that the second section might make more sense. There is an interaction between, you know, the literature review and thinking about goals and key terms and stuff like that. One of the reasons you look at the literature is to figure out what other people have done, what methods they've used, what approaches they've taken, and what results they've seen. And then that helps you to help define what it is you want to do. And so we'll worry about these other elements later as we get into this thing. But right now we'll focus on getting started and begin to think about this first element here, the problem statement, area of improvement piece. Questions about that plan? Yes, it is doable.
Do we need to submit our problem area for you first before we dive all in?
Yeah, and I'll give you feedback on that, and I'll try to steer you in maybe what I think are might be fruitful directions with that feedback. You know, there are some things that you might want to get into that really are not going to be terribly fruitful for you in terms of finding sources on that, resources.
Would it be beneficial to look at our school improvement plan now?
Yeah, if you want to start there, yeah.
Work towards some of the same goals?
Yeah, if you want to pick up something out of the school improvement plan, that's certainly something that I would encourage you.
Okay, is there a sample or some type of, I guess, a sample we could look at of one that's been done before?
Yeah, there are. I'm not going to give them to you yet.
Okay.
One of the things that I like to avoid is, I like for individuals to have a certain amount of freedom and creativity and kind of how they get into these things.
Okay.
And so I don't have I don't want to start off, well, here's the perfect one I had that was done last time, or here's the perfect one. This is the one you want to follow. Yeah, I don't want to do that.
Okay.
And so once we kind of get into this a little bit, and maybe get into the second submission, or maybe even a little bit more into the lit review or whatever, then I'll start giving you examples. And once we get example of lit review, narratives for lit review and stuff like that, and we kind of get a little bit deeper into those elements, then I'll give you an example of a finished product. But I really want to resist you feeling as if you need to follow a very, very, very specific way of doing this
Okay.
You follow the outline, obviously, but not a very, very specific way of writing this thing. And just kind of, it becomes more of a fill in the blanks thing. And I want the creativity up front, and then we'll give you all the examples you need, more than you ever want to deal with. I'm sorry, I'm difficult that way.
I had some more individual questions. So I'm not in library science as my major, and my professor advised that I take this section because I would likely learn more, just based on teaching style and level of engagement. And I'm preparing to write my thesis in music therapy, and I'm wondering if I could tailor it to what I'm
Absolutely.
for my thesis instead of school improvement.
Absolutely. If you will send me, in fact, where's your, I'm trying to see if I got your name here. Okay. You are Kelsey, is that it?
Yes.
Okay.
I think there's two.
What I will do is I will send you an email with an attachment that has research prospectus
Perfect.
model and a little bit more approach geared that way. And you'll just have to keep reminding me as we go along. Now, almost everything else we do will be germane to how you approach this, even the logic modeling piece and that sort of stuff.
Okay.
You'll probably be looking more at a theoretical construct as opposed to, a theory of action, but that's, we'll kind of one-on-one that as we go along.
Okay. Yeah.
Let me make a note to do that, because once again, if my short-term memory fails me, at least I'll have it written down somewhere.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I just wanted to make sure that I could use this class as effectively as possible for what I'm looking to do.
Yeah, and I'll be glad to read whatever draft you come up with as we go along. Like I said, I do an awful lot with dissertations, and I don't do so much with thesis, but they're kind of like a mini dissertation sort of idea anyhow. So yeah. It's not terribly difficult. Okay. Okay. And you say it's in music?
Yeah, I'm a master's in music therapy and counseling. So
okay, yeah, all right.
Therapy thesis.
Okay. Yes, I will do that. It might be, I'll be on the road tomorrow, so if it's not later tonight, it might be the weekend, but I'll get that. I'll get that to you. Okay. Other questions or comments? Let me turn the share off here so we can see everybody.
For the brainstorming activity that's due, I guess, on Tuesday, do you want just a list of ideas that we have just in a doc?
If you have more than one, feel free to do, a couple of three. Let's not put 12 out there. As much thought process as you put into them, a paragraph or so, maybe on each one, that would be useful. As opposed to just, a list of ideas, sort of idea, I'm not going to try to steer you away from anything that you have a true interest in. I'm just going to try to steer you in a direction that I think is potentially more feasible for you, as opposed to, going down blind alleys. I mean, I think graduate work requires a certain level of frustration, but there's no sense being more frustrated than you need to be.
Is there a certain length you're wanting the overall project to be?
Excuse me, I didn't catch.
Sorry. Is there a certain length for these papers to be, or?
No, I don't necessarily do that. I find that most of these projects, once they get, once you kind of get into the elements and get into the pieces, they kind of become what they become. And typically they're, anywhere from a dozen to a couple of dozen pages. And once again, it's you know, some of it's writing style. I mean, I'm more of a Hemingway type. I don't bother with a lot of Faulkner sort of stuff. Other people are more Faulkner-esque, and you've never met a clause that you didn't want to include in a sentence, you know. Yeah, I mean, it's probably better somewhere in the middle, but you know, I'm a technical writer, so you know, that's kind of my drive. But it's yeah, typically these end up being maybe, as I said, somewhere between 12 and 20, 25 pages, something like that. And once you get into it, I think you'll find that that's not a 12 is really a low end of it, because once we format these things and everything is double spaced and 12 point and you know, all those sorts of things, and there'll be some charts in here, you know, once we get into the kind of the action plan sort of notion and you know, what data do you collect for certain outcomes and things like that. I mean, there will be some things that are better expressed in charts than they are in narrative, and then with a narrative description to them. And so you'll find the space eats up pretty quickly. Yeah. Of course, you know, my entire dissertation was 78 pages. That was almost a record. It didn't quite make the record books. There was one of my committee members who had gotten their degree. I got my PhD from University of Virginia, but one of my committee members got his degree from there 25 years earlier, and his was 72 pages. But you know, mine was 78, so I was second place for a long time. And they accepted it. Yeah, defended it first time. Boom. And so that was because I picked a very, you know, I always tell people, if you're going to write a dissertation or you know, thesis, you know, pick a fairly straightforward area. And particularly if you're writing a dissertation, you know, quantitative will really get you there a lot quicker, because it's, you know, doing quantitative research is much more efficient in terms of getting from beginning to end than doing more qualitative research. But, you know, I'm a mixed methods person, so I do quantitative and qualitative. It's just that, you know, if I was writing a dissertation, I did a quantitative thing and I could do it in 78 pages. And if I were doing a qualitative thing at that time on the same topic, it would have probably been 200 pages. So it's, you know, you kind of, your writing style kind of drives a lot of how long projects like this are. And you will find that, you know, I'm not a total grammar freak or anything like that. In fact, you know, I probably am not the best editor in the world on some areas like that. But if I catch things in your writing, then you know I need to really kind of buckle down on this, because it's not terribly unusual to run across things that kind of pass for a sentence, but they're actually fragments and you know, dangling clauses and all kinds of things that, because if you write kind of in a stream of consciousness thing, your consciousness doesn't know punctuation and grammar. And so once it gets on paper, it becomes something different. So you can't edit enough. I guess that's my summation of that. You really can't edit enough. You can't look at it enough times. Because it is, you know, you'll be amazed how many times you'll glide right over something 3 or 4 times, and then the 5th time you look at it, you're going like, how in the world? How did I do that? And, you know, that's just because you don't read every word, you don't read every sentence. You know, you read beginning letters and you add the next 3 words in automatically. And, you know, so it's kind of, you know, editing with a very picky purpose is always a good habit to get into. Or if you're like me, I always make sure I have a former English teacher on the research team I'm writing with, and they catch everything. And that way I don't have to worry about it. You know, they'll fix anything I screw up. So, all right. Just a couple of comments, and then we'll call it a night. What are we looking at? Oh, we're a little past 6:30. This video will go up. Certainly be later tonight because Zoom is not real good about processing video. And then it takes a while for YouTube to process once I get over on that side. So, you know, by the time you look at this website, maybe in the morning, you'll find that the video's up there if you're so inclined to need it or want it or whatever. The course is built around the idea that research occurs in different ways. And there is a certain logic set that in fact, a couple of them, that we employ when we talk about research in general. And, you know, one of those logic sets is very much what's called inductive. And one of those logic sets is very deductive. And both of them have similar elements. They just have them in different order. For example, deductive logic, kind of that quantitative thing that we deal with, or primarily quantitative methodology we deal with, is deductive. In that we start with a hypothesis and we make a prediction and we construct research and we reach a conclusion. And so, you know, we are narrowly defining what it is we want to look at, and we're narrowly defining, you know, what the questions are we want to answer. The other type of logic, which was the primary research logic for basically most of human history, was a logic that is related to inductive thought process. And, you know, it goes all the way back to the Greeks and the Chinese and whoever else back in sort of antiquity. And the idea was that you basically kept your eyes open and you recorded information, and you collected and you collected and you collected and you collected lots and lots and lots of data. You observed lots and lots and lots of things. And then after you had a whole bunch of data like that, you tried to make some sense out of it. You tried to, okay, how can I put this together? And what are the commonalities and what are the differences, and you know, sort of what are the threads that might run through this thing? And all of the great, you know, science, you know, prior to the middle of the 19th century was done that way. You know, that's the way, you know, for example, when you look at the sort of the notion that the Earth went around the sun as opposed to the other way around things, it was very much based on observation, because you observed the stars and you observed the planets in the skies and all. You realize that, you know, they didn't go in perfect circles, and they didn't, you know, the only way that Earth as the center of the universe could work is if everything moved in perfect circles. Well, they didn't. In fact, that nasty planet Mars actually moved backwards part of the year. Instead of going in one direction, it actually turned around and went the other way. And so it over a period of literally hundreds of years, there was some early observation that kind of led to the notion that yeah, it didn't work that way. The Earth must rotate around the sun, or something else must be that way. Kind of the Copernican thing. And, you know, of course, it was in a period of time when all rules and, you know, all decisions were made by, you know, the Roman Catholic Church, the Holy Roman Church. And so that couldn't be accepted because it went against what the church said was true. And so it was more observation and more observation. And eventually Kepler developed the theory of laws of motions of the planets, and it predicted almost perfectly the way the planets move, the way the stars move, the incidence of eclipses, all those things. And it was based on pure observation. It was based on 40 years of people going up on the rooftop of buildings at night and making notes and charting and observing the stars and the planets. 40 years worth of data. In fact, Kepler himself did 20 years of that, and the other data was 20 years of data he stole from his mentor, who was, a boozer and died in his prime at 400 and some pounds of a burst bladder by drinking too much beer. But he had 20 years worth of data. Well, Kepler just kind of swooped all that up. So he had 40 years worth of data, and eventually he was able to figure out, laws of motion of the planets. So that was an inductive process. Collect a lot of data, try to make some sense out of it. And, Darwin's theory, built the same way, very inductive. Evolution came about basically on observation. And so about the middle of the 19th century, and if you look at, that type of research allowed for great advances in society and science from, say, about the 14th century, when we were able to get out of the Dark Ages and the church accepted science as something that was a meaningful pursuit. And after, a millennium and a half of being in the Dark Ages, suddenly things moved along very rapidly, but, it reached a point at which we weren't able to move much beyond what we knew because the pace of science was so slow. And that led to, in the 19th century, the sort of the modern scientific method, which was a very deductive model in that we hypothesized a certain theory, a connection between a couple of variables. We predicted a particular outcome, if that were true. We built a research methodology that looked at smaller groups of data, but very strictly structured groups of data. And we analyzed that to see if it agreed with our prediction. And if it did, then we felt that we had learned a little bit of something about perhaps cause and effect. And that led to the next round of inquiry. And if you look at the pace of science from the early 19th century until, today, essentially it has been, galloping along at a rocket's pace. What each generation now we think probably will be exposed to perhaps 1,000 times the knowledge of the previous generation. And a lot of that has to do with the pace of inquiry, the pace of experimentation, the pace of research. But that understanding that both of those notions work for different purposes didn't come about until, say, the middle of the 20th century. And it was actually the feminist movement and the social science movement out of the University of Chicago and different places that pushed us into thinking about a new inductive approach, but one that didn't require so much data, because we only looked at a small number of subjects. But we looked at these subjects in a very deep manner, as opposed to the more quantitative approach that looked at a bigger number of subjects, but in a very shallow manner around very specific variables that could be measured. And so we soon learned, there's a big argument in the latter half of the latter half of the 20th century that, if you were a quantitative researcher and believed in deductive research, it was because you didn't really like working with real people. You just liked working with numbers. And if you were a qualitative research and you were doing qualitative research because you couldn't handle the numbers. You couldn't do the math. And so, those debates went back and forth. Who's better? Which is better? Which is better? Which is better? And finally, by, toward the last couple of decades of the 20th century, we realized there is no better. There's just different ways of collecting different kinds of data to answer different purposes. And there are things that we can do with quantitative data that we can't do with qualitative data. And there are things we can do with qualitative data that we can't do with quantitative data. And it's not like we can use one or the other to answer all questions. They're limited as to the type of question and the type of inquiry that they can answer. And so the researcher today that's not necessarily focused only in one way or the other, understands that if you don't know an awful lot about something and you're trying to develop a knowledge base about something or develop some idea of what are the real things at play here or whatever, the best way to go about it is a very qualitative approach. If you know what the variables are and you have a base of research that says this is what we think should happen, and we can predict an outcome, then qualitative research won't get us there, but quantitative research can. And so it's this idea of a very expansive way of looking at things. If we're trying to figure out, what's going on here, or we're trying to get at meaning or whatever, as opposed to a very confined way of looking at things, if we just want to know what's happening. Does this seem to be related to whatever? Does this particular drug have this effect? And then, it's a matter of thinking about, how do we answer those questions? And we can't do it we'll pick one approach or the other. We have to fit the approach to the question. And that's why most research today is done by teams. Most good research or most professional scholarly stuff also includes a mixed method sort of model to it, where you're collecting some data in a quantitative manner, some data in a qualitative manner. So that's the frame I come from. And as we go along, we'll incorporate those ideas into this project as we begin to work through it, and we'll kind of build all these support notions as we go along. And so expect sessions and asynchronous sessions to be divided between the project that you're working on and a little bit of conceptual understanding of the key ideas, key concepts, key elements of both kinds of research. Questions, thoughts, gripes, anything in general? Okay. Well, I'm going to go grab a quick little bite to eat before the 7:30 group shows up, and try to catch my breath and get another bottle of water or two and see if we can get through the rest of the evening. I will turn this recorder off. It'll get up tonight, and I will see you next week.
Hope your son does well.
I think so. I think we're in a good direction, and we feel good about where he's working with. we've been told that this is an extremely, extremely rare tumor. And, the reason we're doing Johns Hopkins as opposed to other places, even though it's a 3-hour drive to get up there, is that they're the only ones that have done treatment with this type of tumor and have expertise in doing it. And so they have a plan. They have a couple of plans. They have some ideas, and it goes to the what do they call it? It goes to the tumor board at the hospital Monday or Tuesday, and then they'll decide on a plan, and they'll run it by my son, and he'll probably run it by us, and then we'll get in business. But we think the outcome is positive. Prognosis is good. It's just it's his luck. he gets something that nobody's really seen that much before. So he'll make it into some article someplace, I'm sure, because somebody, it's a teaching hospital, it's a research hospital, so somebody will write an article on it, and he'll be prime front and center on this thing. So he'll be famous in all the bad, most worst ways. Somebody that had something that made him famous, but it was. But we think everything looks good. We're hoping at least it plays out. But thanks. Yeah. Okay, folks. Well, I got to get a bite to eat, and so I will see you next week, and we'll kind of take it from there. Have a good evening.